Broadcasting live. It's America's longest running talk show on computers. It's Computer America, bringing you the biggest names in technology with guest interviews, new products, and your emails. Listen live at computeramerica.com on any device around the world. Email the show at live@computeramerica.com or find us on social media. Be sure to check out our website for contests, giveaways, show notes, live video stream, podcasts, and more. You're listening to Computer America.
Hello and welcome everyone into the Computer America Show. We are the nation's longest running, nationally syndicated radio talk show on computers and technology. Thank you for joining us, everyone. Today on the program, in the second part of the show, we will have computer and technology news. In whatever time we have left, we'll be covering current events, new products, new articles, policy, things like that, just to try to keep everyone up to date. But in the first part of the program, we're always happy to have guests, and we're very happy to have this guest. We're going to be talking to Archive 360 here in just a moment. And if you haven't heard about them, this is going to be the show for you. We're going to cover everything they do, how they do it, and, really security as a service and what that really means. This may be a, more kind of corporate side of it, but I think everyone, should have some kind of idea how security works because, even if you're not a corporation or, even if you're not, a security manager for your company or something like that, I think it gives us all a peace of mind just to know that, your data, it's consumers' data on these servers a lot of the time, and you should know how this thing works. So I'm very happy to have Archive 360 on in just a moment. But before we get to that, everyone, computeramerica.com, that's where you'll find everything, including past shows, future shows, archives, including the podcast. If you want to, that's the second best way to listen to us. If you can't catch us live on IRN, you can always catch us on the podcast. And also in the show notes, we'll have a link directly to our guest website and any resources that we link to or discuss. So you just have to relax, listen, and you can find everything in one convenient place, computeramerica.com. Now, with all that being said, and social media, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, why don't we go ahead and just jump right into our conversation and get our guest on. So as I said before, Archive 360, all about information management and, not just securing, but of course managing your data. And, it's a big task because so much of it has been migrating. And I'm sure in the past year, their jobs have been hectic, while everyone else is kind of waiting at home for things to end. I'm sure they did not sit around. So joining us today is Mr. Bill Tolson. He is the Vice President of Global Compliance and eDiscovery for Archive 360. And Bill, welcome on to Computer America. How you doing?
Great. Well, thank you, Ben. I really appreciate being on your broadcast today. So looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And let's go ahead and just get started with a little bit of background on Archive 360, kind of what its mission statement is. And then on top of that, yourself, how have you always been in technology and security? When did you find yourself working with Archive 360?
Actually, it's been an interesting journey here. Yes, I have always been in technology. Actually, I started out in the early 70s working as a technician for a phone answering machine company that doesn't exist anymore. But have always been there and have been through several large corporations and several startups and kind of gotten the taste. Also been a consultant for a couple of well-known companies. But I've been with Archive 360 6 years now. And started off as the VP of marketing, but I've always been more on the technical side with my consulting background. So I've kind of transitioned into looking at, all of the regulatory compliance laws that are popping up now and over the last several years, as well as eDiscovery or litigation support for companies dealing with huge amounts of data.
And I'm sure that you are way more up to date on this than I am, but things like I want to say like the not GDPR, the one that passed in Europe a couple of years ago.
Yeah, GDPR.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I was right. And every time I say GDPR, I'm like gross domestic product. I'm like, no, it's not right. So GDPR, and then of course with COVID, I'm sure you have been very busy because a lot of companies are, if they weren't in, if they didn't really have a fleshed out cloud system before, it's almost mandatory nowadays, with everyone working remotely and of course not being able to head into an office. How has, the last couple of years, and more specifically, how has the last year been for Archive 360?
Yeah, it's been real interesting. It's been interesting for a lot, but ever since the GDPR was enacted back in 2018, data subject privacy has been a major concern for companies around the world because the fines are so large. They're huge, unheard of before. So everybody's been very careful, and it's constantly getting new interpretations and things like that. You'll get legal documents out of the EU talking about a changed interpretation on Article 45 or whatever it happens to be. But personal privacy of data, and no surprise here, as well, with all the talk about the high-tech industries collecting data, and that's how they make their money. But it spawned the California CCPA, which was amended by the CPRA. Virginia just passed one. Colorado, which is the state I'm sitting in right now, and where I live, just passed a privacy bill. So privacy has been really, really ramping up, and it's getting very complex for companies to do. But along with that, like you mentioned, with COVID and everybody working from home, a lot of the data that companies are generating via their dispersed employees, it's all corporate data. There's lots of sensitive material in it, including personal information, but as IP and know-how and stuff. It's not being centrally managed as well because it's sitting on personal laptops, or business laptops or workstations. And by the way, that also very much complicates eDiscovery, which is responding to a lawsuit because it's very data driven these days.
Right.
And it's also affecting, government agencies through FOIA requests because they're all dispersed too. And when you get a Freedom of Information Act request, you have a very limited number of days if you're in the agency to respond to it. And none of them are. None of them can respond within the time allotted. So that's generating lawsuits against the federal agencies.
And of course, our first, kind of topic that we have here is about high-profile cyber attacks and hacking that have been happening. And I think that people cared a little bit less back in the day because most financial or most hacks were on financial services. But then like Equifax really changed the game where suddenly everyone's personal data was out there. It was like 150 million or something like that. And ever since then, here on the show, almost on a weekly basis, we cover which school district, which water processing plant, which which oil pipeline has been hacked. These high-profile hacks that happen, we constantly see that they're having a real-life effect. And then on top of that, like you have here, there's some kind of response that is almost knee-jerk, but at the same time, I'm sure to security professionals like yourself and your team, it's kind of like, well, that's kind of best practices, and making it law, that's good. A lot of companies should have been doing these things anyways. How do you feel about whenever there's a high-profile attack, suddenly there's a response to it? Do you try to stay ahead of the curve with best practices, and or do you find legislation that comes out to be I want to say naive, because that's what I'm used to in the tech industry, is that you have legislators who don't understand the technology trying to make laws for it. Is the response appropriate, and is there a better way?
No, the response is not appropriate. Great question. At least they're trying to do something now. And one of the biggest kind of issues that we have in the United States is the lack of anything getting done within Congress. Mm-hmm. I mean, what we have now is 50 states and the Washington D.C. coming up with their own privacy laws, all slightly different. So you can imagine a company trying to defend against 51 different privacy laws, not including the ones in Europe and Brazil and Japan and so forth. So the Congress really needs to do something. Every year there's several bills in Congress that never get through. Mm-hmm. But actually, I'm writing an article right now on that very subject you touched on. Are these laws capable of really taking care of the issues? And the answer is no. And my basic point within the article is, for example, the Colorado law or the Connecticut law that was just voted down, or the Virginia law, they say, and they almost all use the same words, that corporations must use a reasonable amount of security or protection to guard against, hacks and ransomware and stuff. And none of them define a reasonable amount. Right. Even in the GDPR, they say a reasonable amount of technology and security. But later in the GDPR, they do say, and this is an interesting question, at least in GDPR, they say on the breach response requirement, you get breached, data was maybe looked at, so forth, and stolen, it triggers a breach response notice to all of the people affected. And that gets very expensive. It's not just sending an email out. Mm-hmm. It's all kinds of stuff. But in the GDPR, it says, but if your data was encrypted, if the personal information was encrypted, then and it gets very wishy-washy on this. It says you may not need to consider it a breach and do a response. None of the U.S. state laws even touch that. So right. The idea of if it's encrypted and the encryption keys were not accessed, then in reality, that encrypted data could not have been looked at, and therefore, it's not an issue for the data subjects. Right. But the state laws are just not looking at that. And what I'm doing in the articles, I'm going through and saying these are the minimum things that you must say a company must do. You must encrypt. You must keep the encryption keys in a totally different system, and so forth and so on.
And of course, that's I think that's one thing that Europe has over the U.S., at least with kind of the EU body being able to put out one set of rules. And while each country is kind of fighting for, like you said, that the language and interpretations, at least they're on they're talking about the same thing. Whereas, like you said here, 50 different states. Although I think California has a really kind of overarching effect that really whatever happens in California, a lot of other states try to at least meet that minimum. So
California is the most prescriptive in the states, and it's really not. It lacks all of those specifics. And I'm not suggesting that the lawmakers suggest a certain kind of technology or something like that. You don't want to get into saying you must use an EMC, Centera or something like that.
But they are lawyers, and it really surprises me because, and while my my legalese is not the best, to put words in there like reasonable and proper and appropriate, like that doesn't specify anything, and it never has in any legal document. That leaves a lot of room for for a lot of weirdness. So, and then of course you run into situations like I already mentioned the pipeline. What do I want to say? Solar flare? No, like the solar winds. There we go. Yeah, the solar winds attack that affected. We're still finding out how many things that affected. Can the size and severity of these hacks are getting worse, and as someone who works within the industry, you would hope that, we've been touting best practices. We've been touting, kind of what the bare minimum is that you were talking about writing in your article. We've had kind of a bare minimum for the past 15 years, when these things are starting to get worse and worse. The problem is getting worse and worse. And we're finding that, in a lot of these cases, it's like, we forgot to put a password on all of our data. We're sorry. Like the bare minimums are not being met.
Or the password was SolarWinds 123.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, how do you, identifying what the problem is one thing, but do you think the industry at large has a problem with security in that, as always, security is the antithesis to access. And, people are lazy. People are... people just want instant access. They don't want to worry about security. How do we fix that? Is that something, that we have to create a technology that kind of accounts for that, with biometrics and reading and scanning and all that kind of thing? Like, is this a problem that we're going to fix in the next year or 2 years with, enough people reading enough pamphlets?
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And the answer in my mind is no, we're not going to reach that in the next 1 or 2 years. I mean, what the industries now are starting to talk about, and you've probably heard the term zero trust. Mm-hmm. And you touched on some of the issues while you were just explaining the topic. Right. And you're in a corporate system, and employees don't want to have to sign into every system. You can use things like Active Directory and things to recognize stuff, and then you could put in granular access controls and things like that. But in reality, you still got to get to this point, of zero trust, because if you don't, then you start getting, through a phishing attack, somebody gets in and through privilege escalation works their way up to being, the VP of IT and having access to everything. And that's what companies are not looking at. Number one, and I work with lots and lots and lots of companies that still the amount of education that companies give to their employees around security, even the most basic stuff, is really lacking. And you could say, well, gee whiz, they're mostly adults. They should know this stuff. But take my word for it, a lot of them don't. They don't think about that stuff. And now we got these new this cyber and this ransomware stuff is evolving so quickly that the Continental Pipeline ransomware attack was actually a 3-stage extortionware attack, where they get in through phishing or something, and they look around the system for a period of time. They check out that information that they want to encrypt. And then they wait a little while. But before they encrypt any of the data, they copy it over to their own, cyber criminals servers. So they're holding a lot of the corporate data, including personal information. So part of the ransom is, gee, you're not going to get the encryption key if you don't pay us, $4 million in Bitcoin. But, oh, by the way, we have all this really interesting, sensitive and personal information that we're going to release on the internet. Gee whiz, that's going to cause your brand equity all kinds of problems. Your customers are not going to be happy. And oh, by the way, this is interesting. I wrote a blog for the Cybersecurity Tech Accord last May, and I suggested a possibility that in this one specific time of extortionware, that part of the ransom could be, we got all this personal information and that you were holding them EU citizens. We're going to let the GDPR authorities know that you lost this data and it's now on the internet. So you're
extorting them to the authorities.
Yeah. And you're looking at a $20 million euro fine, much greater than what the ransom is. Now, Continental Pipeline went one step further, and the hackers started contacting individuals of the information they had taken from Continental Pipeline before they encrypted it. And they started contacting each and every one and ransoming them as well. So it's just kind of, stair-stepping up. It's wild. But and in fact, on that GDPR thing with the Cybersecurity Tech Accord, 3 or 4 weeks after that article was published, the first version of that actually came out, where they used that specific strategy, and they said, we're contacting the GDPR authorities that we have all your sensitive data and we're going to release it.
And that, of course, is the craziest part, because and that's something that, and we're going to start talking about Archive 360 here in a moment, is that a lot of these companies, they're pipelines, they're government institutions, they're really no excuse for the networks over at SolarWinds, but still, a lot of these places are not security-minded places. Like, they need to be, and that's that's obviously something that the U.S. is looking at, really hardening its infrastructure, and good luck with that. But everyday people, the accountant, the receptionist, the whatever person who clicks on the phishing link, whatever. Yeah, and we've said it all the time that, security is your responsibility. It's everyone's responsibility at all times, but they're not really security-minded people. So that's why security as a service and zero trust, like you said, but security as a service. Let's talk about what Archive 360 does and how we can kind of fix this, because, on a personal level, yes, personal responsibility needs to take some kind of role, but at the same time, being able to outsource that and kind of say that we're going to focus on making cakes, and you're going to focus on, keeping all of our, keeping our customer database nice, clean, spiffy, and you're going to focus on the security aspect of it and all that kind of thing. I'm assuming that's, I have a pretty good idea of what Archive 360 is, but if you'd like to kind of outline what it is exactly that, information management and building and, kind of building up a cloud infrastructure kind of looks like from your point of view.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. One point, going back to a topic you were talking about, the whole lot we were talking about, you have to take reasonable measures to protect the data. In a court of law, it doesn't matter if you're sitting in Europe or in the United States, those companies who suffer, a breach, who's to say they didn't take reasonable measures? What are reasonable measures? I could see their lawyers arguing the fact that nobody else does. Everybody else does it the same way we do. Therefore, it's reasonable. So legally, it's going to be an issue. But with Archive 360, we are an information management and archiving platform in the cloud. And I know you've seen some of the material around SaaS offerings, software as a service.
Right.
What that is, and it's been around for a long time. And what that is some vendor creates a really nice, very focused application that they put into someone's cloud. It's usually not their own, but they lease space from the cloud. And customers will utilize that application, whether it be an email or archiving application, or Salesforce, for example, is in a SaaS cloud. There's lots of them, and they do a very good job. But with SaaS offerings, you're buying access to an application in the cloud, and you're depending on the SaaS provider to give you the right amount of access and bandwidth and security and everything else. And most SaaS providers are what we refer to as it's a one size fits all type of situation. They don't allow customization based on exactly what you want, because they got 2,000 other customers that whatever, and it's basically a standard application in cloud that does the job for most people for certain things. We looked at it differently, and we decided we were going to develop a PaaS-based our cloud architecture. So platform as a service versus a software as a service. So with the platform as a service, it gives you more fine-tuning capability, more customization capability. But we went even further, and that our application, cloud application, is actually installed in the customer's own tenancy. For example, they have an Azure, tenancy. Our application gets installed in their Azure tenancy. So it's their application, it's their data within their legal tenant. We never have access to their data. We can monitor and run the application itself, but we never have access. That was a very important capability for most chief information security officers, because a lot of them were holding back from going fully into the cloud because of security. They didn't want to put their most sensitive data into a third-party cloud where they didn't control, the actual tenancy, the encryption keys, and so forth. Right. So by moving it directly into a customer's, for example, in this case, an Azure tenancy, in reality, it's a private cloud that they control and they own. And then on top of that, adding the ability to create your own encryption keys, encrypt your data before it goes into the cloud. Keeping the encryption keys on premise, even a better type of security, has been very well received by, FinServ, for example, financial services, very security conscious. I'm glad they are. They deal with a lot of information, hospitals, healthcare, those kinds of things. So they're all now fully committing to moving all of their data into the cloud, the whole digital transformation thing. But now they can do it because it's their data in their cloud tenancy and they control it, not some third-party vendor.
Yeah, and of course, being able to choose a different provider, and you kind of come in and work with everyone else. I mean, you're taking a lot of the, I hate the word onus, but we're going to use onus. You're taking a lot of the effort and a lot of the work onto yourself as
Sure.
As archive. Do you ever find that obviously you don't want a one size fits all? Like that's the
Right.
solution that you're providing, but at the same time, there's a lot of nuances to everyone's data, to everyone's services, the amount of access and bandwidth, and that blah 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 blah. There's so many different variables. Do you ever find yourself, I don't know, kind of getting a little bit falling into the same routine as the cookie cutter, everyone gets it, or have you created your software, your platform to be that receptive to everyone else? How, I guess, is kind of my basic question.
Yeah, no, and you touched on another differentiator in that if it's a standalone application in your own cloud as a client versus a one size fits all app sitting in some other cloud, you have the ability through APIs and all kinds of things to add functionality to it. For example, one of the biggest movements with cloud, large amounts of cloud data, and we're talking petabytes of data. Some customers have many petabytes of data in the clouds. In fact, one of the Microsoft guys I did a podcast with a week or so ago said he has customers that are actually dealing with exabytes of data for their own company. But by doing that, you have the ability to the path I was going down is the biggest additional capability people are looking for is the ability to do and customize analytics. I have a huge amount of data. I want to take advantage of it. I want to mine it. I want to run analytics programs on it and see if I could figure out new things that I'm not aware of. And if you're sitting in a third-party SaaS cloud, number one, even if they have any analytics capability at all, you're dealing with theirs, and it's probably not what you're looking for. With a PaaS type of solution or a private cloud, you have the ability to potentially plug and play, switch out different kinds of additional capability to take advantage of that data. And by the way, I mean, we are talking about hundreds of terabytes or petabytes. One of the things that a lot of companies have been dealing with for a long time is we need to get rid of some of that stuff as well. And that's that's the basis when you say information management. We do it. We're an information management company. Information management is not just capturing data and holding it forever. It's actually managing it and looking for expired information or valueless information and getting rid of it. Because data, I wrote an article a couple of months ago. If data is the new oil, then we have an environmental hazard on our hands. Because it is risky.
We have seen lots of articles, and we're going to touch a little bit on machine learning and AI. And if you think that's kind of marketing stuff and whatnot, but we have seen that it's not access to data that is really separating the good AI from the bad AI. It's being able to kind of curate the data, sanitize it, get rid of the useless stuff, and that you don't need to train your AI on that might, send it down the wrong direction.
Right.
So, does your company, obviously you'll manage the data and things like that, but does Archive 360 actually start curating the data, as per your customer's request? And on top of that, I'm seeing things like here, AI-powered supervisory review. Clearly, I believe you said that you didn't have access to people's data, so I'm kind of also curious, is that just how the data is treated and not AI trained on the data that is provided to you? Go ahead.
I'm sorry. We as a company do not have access to customers' data, but our platform does.
Okay.
So, I mean, and we help them with it. We can even run it for them if they want to. Most want to kind of do it themselves in their own tendency, and that's differentiators. We don't have our fingers in their data, but the application, like you were just saying, I come from a machine learning background. Mm-hmm. I worked with a litigation support company called Recommind many years ago, and they were one of the first companies to commercialize predictive coding, if you know what predictive coding is. And that was basically the ability of using machine learning, taking, say Archive 360 gets sued and we get an eDiscovery request for, data going back 10 years that, anybody, that was a senior manager above touched. You see those kinds of things. You potentially could be looking at millions of documents. And in the bad old days, meaning, probably still going on today, you would do a collection and find those million or 2 million or 5 million documents, and you would give them to your outside law firm, and they would read each one to see if it was actually responsive to the case. And you're talking about lawyers reading millions of documents at $85, $200, $300 an hour.
Yeah.
And it would take a long time, and the cost of eDiscovery would be, monumental. It'd be in the millions or tens of millions. Predictive coding using machine learning, we would train the machine to determine what was responsive and what was not. So, of the 5 million documents, after the computers got done chunking on it, you might have 200,000 that you want live humans to actually review versus the 5 million. That was one of the first commercial uses of machine learning. Nowadays, when we're getting into archiving and information management, which obviously we do have machine learning capabilities. Now, one of the advantages of us being a native, for example, Azure application is our software can take advantage of the entire Azure technology stack. So we can plug into it and use different parts. They have a very advanced machine learning AI stack, technology stack, that we actually take advantage of. That's one of the things the SaaS providers can't do, because they're in there, they create their own environment, their own operating system and everything, versus we're taking advantage of the hundreds of thousands of data scientists and so forth at Microsoft or wherever to take advantage of their machine learning and AI. So you mentioned supervisory. One of the capabilities within the Archive to Azure platform directed specifically at financial services, because under SEC Rule 17A4 and the FINRA rules, all communications between broker traders and clients or customers have to be supervised, meaning they have to be captured, and then they have to be potentially sampled and looked at for forbidden language. Stuff like, I guarantee you're going to make $1 million, or
right.
Here's some pre-market information you're not going to have, but I'm going to have it. So part of the supervisory function is to watch those broker traders' communications, even across social media and stuff, and text messages and so forth, and basically alert higher ups within that given FinServ that something potentially is going on that is going to cause the company problems. Now, part of that supervisory function is to take, you have a keyword lexicon. Gee, I'm going to look through emails, and if it has this word in it, I'm going to flag it. Right. Anybody could do that. But with machine learning, we're able to, in a sampling process, maybe for, Bill Tolson, the broker, in the last day, I sent 50 emails, and my compatriots, all the other brokers each sent, something like that. So there's literally thousands of emails. The supervisory function using machine learning will start sampling those. They'll look for the keywords first, but then they'll start taking random samples out and looking at them. Well, part of the machine learning is looking at those random samples. And as the supervisor goes through and says, this isn't a problem, no worry, this is a problem. Mm-hmm. We need to send this up the chain. And as you do that over a period of time with machine learning, the system is learning. So after, a period of time, those samples of 200 or 300 each, could end up at 10. And all the rest, go by the wayside. And that's a huge productivity gain for those people.
Like you said, with that overtime part, that's super important. Like, do you tell people that your AI is going to be airtight in like 6 years? It's going to be great. Or do you actually have carryover from, and again, it's not that you carry data over from one to the other, but do you have a financial services AI that kind of helps with that kind of thing? And do you have like a medical one? Is that AI yours that you've trained on your customers' data, or is that individual that has to be trained over a period of time?
Well, the industry, including us, will eventually get to the point where you have already fully trained, modules, machine learning AI modules. But right now, using machine learning and AI, you want it to learn based on the specific data it's seeing for that client or that agency or whatever it happens to be. So the biggest, gain will be how fast it can learn. Does it take, 200 learning cycles over a period of 3 months, or can it learn over 3 cycles in a period of a day, and all of a sudden you're golden? Because what you're looking for in machine learning based categorization, for example, is an accuracy rate of 98, 99%. You don't want a 60% accuracy rate, because then, it legally and all kinds of other things, regulatorily, it causes problems. Mm-hmm. But fine tuning that stuff over time. One of the, and I talk to people about this all the time. One of the things that the information management industry wants to do, and the records managers, for example. Records management, the holy grail for records management is I want an AI or a machine learning capability that is 99% accurate in determining which files should be saved for how long, those kinds of things. So auto categorization. Because in the records management, information management industry, a lot of the inaccuracy and a lot of the productivity issues come down to it all still relies on end users. You're sitting here, you get 200 emails in a day. How many people are going to analyze each email and say, well, gee, this one I need to save for 1.5 years and this one for 7. And, those kinds of things. We fall down to the 5-second rule. Right. In most cases during when I was consulting, 5-second rule is if it takes an end user more than 5 seconds to make an accurate, kind of categorization on something, they'll either delete it immediately or mark it as safe forever.
Yeah, and it's funny because I was actually just thinking about that example in terms of email, where I'm sure that Google has been doing this for so long, and they're still marking stuff for spam that shouldn't be in spam, and they're still marking stuff as important that is very clearly not even from the sender who they say they are, and if Google themselves can't even do it, getting that personalized for each individual service, that's a tall order.
Yeah, I mean, we the industry is to the point where you sell a solution into FinServ, for example, you're going to give them additional lexicons and machine learning capability to where they're not starting from zero.
Right.
But again, much like the predictive coding I talked about, it's partly still an individual learning process because of the way a culture in a given company speaks and those kinds of things. It has to take that time to learn. I mean, the old kind of comparison that we always use in machine learning, and you may have heard this before, is how can a computer system recognize the content of a given email with a word penguin in it? Is the penguin the flightless bird? Is it the comic book villain, or is it the publishing house?
Right.
And you want to get the system to be able to sit based on the content around it to say, well, this is obviously the bird, based on the stuff around it. And that's kind of the holy grail when you're going through the machine learning stuff and doing auto categorization.
So I'm really curious. This is your opinion of this subject, because this is what's been coming up in the past couple of years, and we've even heard some futurists with some dire predictions of this, where artificial intelligence, machine learning, and the fact that most companies that are building these things, they have what is essentially like a little black box that is completely, you feed in data, you have the code, and it trains itself, it learns, and then it spits out the result that you hope. And of course, you feed more data, you get better results. By and large, the coding that's happening in there and the way that the AI develops is not only hidden from the company that's making it, but of course, they're highly protective trade secrets, because they spent a lot of money and a lot of time, energy, and effort training these AIs. A conversation that's been popping up, and what I want your response on is, you mentioned these different kind of areas of expertise that the AI could help with. Some people have talked about, instead of waiting for one company to come out with the perfect AI that's just going to completely dominate their sector, what if they made them more kind of open? And of course, it may just be the circles that I'm in with kind of open software, open source, that whole thing, but making kind of combining everyone's efforts, making it open, combining everyone's self-driving car efforts, combining everyone's AI. How would you feel about a more kind of open style of management when it came to AI and machine learning, as opposed to everyone racing to find, like you said, the holy grail and the best solution? Yeah, that's is that pie in the sky?
Well, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and in an ideal world, I'd say heck yeah.
Yeah.
That yes, I mean, if you're taking the best knowledge, thought processes, work from the best across the industries, then I think that the ability for AI and machine learning to progress would be so much faster.
Mm-hmm.
But having been in a machine learning company, the amount of resources that go into creating those algorithms, around the machine learning is so expensive and time consuming that I'm not sure many companies, there'd be some, but some of the companies would not be able to do it, because obviously they wouldn't be able to generate revenue from it.
Right.
So they wouldn't be able to pay for it. You could see the very, very large technology companies, potentially doing that, but even they are going to say, well, gee, I got this new platform. I project I could make, $12 billion a year off it. Am I going to give it away?
Right.
That's capitalism, I guess. But companies do, the information does move around. It's just not being put into an open organization where they can all discuss it and so forth. I mean, like you say, ideally that would be, that would progress the art of it so much faster. But you mentioned black box. That's one of those touch points. When we were selling our predictive coding capability into U.S. courts, our competitors would say, "Well, that's a black box. No one knows what's in it." It's like, well, it doesn't matter. We can mathematically prove the accuracy. So you can argue against that. Or number two, your way of going through 10 million documents to look at responsiveness is to hire 200 contract lawyers from around the world with different educations, and different cultures and everything else. They're all black boxes too. You don't know how they're making decisions, but at least and their measured accuracy is in the 45 to 60% range. So the idea of I think we can get to the point, or we already are at the point where machine learning and AI, they're fine tuning it, they're tweaking it, and they're doing that to do two things: speed the training cycles, but also get that provable accuracy rate as close to 100% as possible. And even in healthcare, for example. No one expects 100%, when you're looking at DICOM images and those kinds of things, but it's based on the individual doctors.
Yeah, and of course there's there's always going to be some way that these things can get better. But I also wanted from you to kind of say here definitively, because we've seen so many ways that I almost feel bad that like marketers are getting onto the machine learning AI craze, where they'll, it was almost like blockchain was a couple of years ago. Everything was on the blockchain, everything was committed to the blockchain, so on and so forth. But you're saying that AI and machine learning for many applications, I'm not saying for all applications, but for many applications and for many of your customers, there is a benefit there for, to have AI, machine learning in some way integrated into their data management system or otherwise. Like
absolutely,
it's not just hocus pocus. It's not just gibberish. There is real value in AI. Absolutely.
The two, it really comes down to ROI. If you spend so much on a solution, are you going to be able to save more than that? With any new solution, and making that ROI argument, it really comes down to what is it? Can I show an ROI of 100% or 2,000%, whatever it happens to be? With machine learning, for example, if you can get faster, much more accurate results in anything. I'm not talking about any specific application, but if you could raise the accuracy and speed it, you're going to save a great deal on end user productivity, and productivity and the accuracy of whatever solution you're trying to better with machine learning is going to benefit the company that bought the solution, but also all of those clients that they work with. It's not some magic thing yet. I'm thinking, geez, do we need to insert Asimov's 3 laws into it or something like that? We're not to that point yet, but it really comes down to productivity and accuracy, I think.
Right. And of course, that's why, services and companies like yourself that, I'm sure that you have lots of very smart people who can walk people through and, really get down to if it's the right solution for you. That's always important. And, so reading through some of the other points here, and unfortunately we're running a little short on time, so we'll kind of cherry pick here. So you already touched on, the idea that finding out what data you need to keep forever, which one needs to be be, you have in the point here, actively manage, and what should they do with the rest? That seems like a pretty big task. And you were mentioning that, that Microsoft associate that you were talking to, some customers have so much data that it seems like the safest thing is to keep it all and just, kind of forget about it and go fishing in the ocean when you need a fish. So talk about your solution, where what's at, how do you advise people to deal with this?
Well, and like I said at the beginning, information management includes getting rid of data. Mm-hmm. There's one case study from years ago, and it involves eDiscovery as well, but it's a great example. DuPont, large chemical company, gets sued a lot. They chose to look at, in any given year, they chose to look at 9 past litigation cases and what they spent on eDiscovery. And it turns out they spent like $24 million in eDiscovery across the 9 cases. Then they went in and looked at that data that they had to go through. They had to collect and review and do all that kinds of stuff. And they found that approximately half of all of those documents that were caught up in the case were expired when they looked at it, and should not have existed. And if those documents had been expired out and deleted, then they wouldn't have spent an additional $11 million reviewing them. So that's one easy example. But defensible disposition, what we're talking about, so much data. You can, like I said, I mentioned exabytes. You can imagine finding a specific document sitting in 2 exabytes worth of data, and how much compute time that would take, what size the search indexes would be. As you look at data, and again, on the legal side, data can be a bad thing. It right. can include a smoking gun that might lose you a case, that if it didn't exist, you might not have lost and had to pay the fine and so forth. But also nowadays with the new privacy regulations, the more data you hold, the chances are the more personal information you're holding. And that needs to be managed, because if somebody, if Bill Tolson calls up, IBM and says, what data are you holding on me? How are you using it? And so forth. I mean, they have to have a complete answer, not just, well, we think we got some of your emails or something like that. Every single piece of that information has to be searchable, findable. And if I say, I want you to get rid of it, then you have to get rid of it, all of it. And if you miss some of it, you're not in compliance. If you're not in compliance, you start looking at fines. So defensible disposition is the idea of, as data ages, if it's not under a regulatory law or if it's not involved in eDiscovery, and it's no longer of value to the company, you should get rid of it. One of the market research companies several years ago, basically came up with the numbers that in any given enterprise, 1% of the data is potentially on legal hold. 5% is considered records under regulatory compliance. 20 to 25% is still potentially valuable to the company and should be saved. But 69% is rot. It's junk, and all it's doing is causing you to buy more storage every year.
I have never put, and I've never even heard it put to me, in those kind of numbers, but that was the feeling that, we've gotten from having, people here on the show, where it's like, there's so much data out there, like you were saying, there's so much data being generated that back in the day, it was kind of the Facebook approach, just suck all the data up that you could, we'll process it later, that whole thing. Nowadays, it's more, we have all the data we could ever want, now let's actually find what's useful. And, and those numbers do sound about right, that the vast majority.
That's exactly it. And part of what we do, part of the information management capability is you set retention disposition policies, and the system can take care of that automatically. If you have a 3-year retention policy on something and it reaches 3 years in 1 day, the system knows that and says, well, gee, I'm going to delete this unless, you want to look at it first, that kind of an audit type thing. But that's the problem with most companies. And while I was consulting, I worked with lots of FinServ companies that would employ my company with millions of dollars of resources for us to go in and look at data on file shares to determine whether it should be kept or not. And it was a defensible disposition type of process. We were trying to find as much stuff that we can delete for that company as possible. And the strange thing about it was, we would accomplish it. We'd end up getting rid of 45% of all of this data, and defensively deleting it, meaning documenting it and so forth. So, legally people don't go after you. But 18 months later, they'd be at the same spot again. And we'd have to go back in and do it again because the disposition, the retention disposition, very few people paid attention to the disposition part.
Right. And you can see how that would definitely vary by industry because, think about medical where, I think people would like their lifelong medical records. They don't want, just because it reached 3 years in one day, it got deleted. So that would be, I would assume, why platform as a service would be.
Oh, and that's where you get into the regulatory requirements for retention, HIPAA High Tech and SEC and IROC. They all have minimum, and in HIPAA, in certain cases, you see regulations that say, well, gee, you have to keep, a patient record for 7 years beyond them passing away.
Right.
How do you know that stuff? Number one, if they've moved and that kind of stuff. But, you could be looking at 30, 40, 50 years. And insurance, potentially, it's even longer under regulatory retention requirements. We dealt with one company that was saving stuff for 99 years. And the question is, will you be able to read it in 99 years?
Yeah.
Long-term archiving.
Yeah. Is the data even usable? I know that there's a lot of data out there still actually being recorded to tape drives. So yeah, it's,
I used to work at a large tape drive manufacturer and there are still companies out there that look at a backup tape as their archive.
Yeah,
which
absolutely.
is terrible.
Well,
in my humble opinion.
Yeah, well, and really that was the one case I heard about tape drives was that that you can store so much data on a tape drive. Of course, getting it off is just as slow. So there's always that trade-off.
Oh yeah. Try to find one file with some personal information on it on a
you got to go through the whole tape.
gigabyte tape. You got to restore it all.
Yeah, exactly. It's very sequential. It's not random access. So yeah, and Bill, we have like about 3 minutes here, and we're gonna wrap this up. Right. But one last point I wanted to, and by the way, great conversation. I've loved talking about this with you.
I'm having a lot of fun.
Perfect. And and the last point I want to talk about was encryption. You mentioned it a little bit ago, and how that would affect so many things. And I'm back to my point of not everyone encrypts, not everyone secures correctly. That whole thing. Encryption is still like the right answer, but how do we make sure that people are encrypting and not saving keys and plain text and that whole thing? How does Archive 360 and how does encryption kind of work into everything we've been talking about?
Well, I've been a long-term believer in encryption. I mean, I have a lot of my own data. I have 4 terabytes of disks sitting on my desk in front of me, and then I have another 2 terabytes, and then in the my OneDrive account, for example. I
Bill, have you heard of defensible disposition? Yeah, I got you.
Wow, you got me on that one. I still use it, with all of the illegal stuff going on now, with all the attacks. People need to understand what the basic requirements are for protecting their own data and their own personal information. I mean, a couple of the things that we do to go above and beyond, we target CISOs, Chief Information Security Officers, right, for certain things. They're the worrisome people within a company. Before you move your data into the cloud, you should encrypt it. As it's in the cloud and it's encrypted, how can you manage it? It's encrypted. You can't access it. You can't do a search on it. Right. You can't do analytics on it. So basically, it's a blob sitting up there. Well, in reality, for years, there's been a technology referred to as homomorphic encryption. And we include that in our on-prem security server before data goes up into the cloud. We encrypt it they encrypt it with their own keys. They move it up. But homomorphic encryption is a type of encryption that allows ongoing computation on an encrypted file, meaning you could search in it, all that kind of stuff, but it's still fully encrypted. So we refer to it as not only data in transit, or secure in transit and secure at rest, but also secure while in use, because it never has to be decrypted, which means what's ransomware going to do with it? They can't decipher it or anything like that. So going that extra mile and encrypting data before it goes into the cloud. SaaS providers, back to the SaaS discussion, what SaaS providers will do is you move your data up in the cloud and they'll encrypt it using their encryption keys. And then when you want to do something with it, it gets decrypted and it gets re-encrypted, all that kind of stuff. We don't have to do that. And it's all your security, not the third-party providers. So we went one step even beyond that, and we also use something called secure multi-party computation, which is a type of encryption where you can have several different users looking at parts of a file that can't see the other parts.
Right. And unfortunately, we have music playing in the background, and that is that's essentially my way of doing the cane with the
Understand.
thing. The conversation could definitely run long, but I'm gonna have to stop it there because we're at an hour. And I want to thank you so much, everyone. We have been talking to Mr. Bill Tolson, archive360.com, if you want to check this out. And of course, if you happen to be one of those individuals that is, hey, this is your job, we highly recommend that you go there. And I'm sure that the website's very easy to get contact right there at the top. Get a demo, contact, very simple. So Bill, thank you for your time, thank you for your expertise, and thank you so much.
I really appreciate it, Ben.
All right, have a good one, everyone. ComputerAmerica.com. We'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.